Olin since the beginning, as part of Nortel Networks originally when we did our first infrastructure, and now at Juniper Networks, and has been a good friend and advocate for Olin College the entire time, and chairs the External Technology Advisory Board as well. So Mark, it's all over to you.
All right, we on? So Joanne took a little bit of what I was going to say, which is fine because it'll be more expedient. No, but that's good. So currently at Juniper, I'm Director of Systems Engineering for our Financial Services Business Unit. And as Joanne said, really happy to be involved with Olin. It's probably been, I don't know, Joanne, 12, 13, maybe 14 years now. So in these oil events, this is number 10 now, I believe. They've really grown and have been fantastic. But I have the privilege of introducing Kevin Kennedy. Now, Kevin, being highly technical, had asked that I spare the formal read of the bio, so it's on page 12 in your guide. But Kevin is a senior business executive and product director, really for our security and data center business unit, all up at the company. He's going to talk about the evolution of security, how we think about security, not just as a product vendor, but how we as a representative of the industry think about security moving forward, what it means to us all, and kind of the evolution of what it means to be a hacker, and really everything from the economics to just the paradigm shift that we're seeing. So Kevin, we can follow up with the folks throughout tonight and tomorrow, but with that, I'll turn it over to you. And I don't know if are you already wired? So,
I am not wired.
But probably don't need it, right?
He needs to have a mic.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I talk with my hands. It's no good. Okay, so yeah, I think this is a great venue to kind of talk through at least what we see as an opportunity and a need to innovate in the way that we think about and tackle security. And so, as you kind of look at innovation, I think it always makes sense to look back before you look forward. And so we're going to go way back to August 12th, 1914, and this was Austria-Hungary, great power in Central Europe. They crossed the river, the Drina River, into Serbia, which was just a nascent Balkan state at that time. It was the Battle of Sur that this started. And there were about 1.4 million Austria-Hungarian operational troops against 250,000 on the Serbian side. And a lot of the people, especially in Austria-Hungary, thought this was going to be, quote unquote, an autumn stroll. But they were wrong. It actually bogged down. The 2nd and 5th armies from Austria-Hungary invaded in. They met stiff resistance. 4 days later, it was a complete victory for the Serbs. They were repulsed. They left 23,000 casualties. So the question is, why? Why were the Serbs able to so effectively stop the superior force? It helped that they knew the war plans from the Hungarians. So this man is Colonel Alfred Redl. He led the counterintelligence for Austria. He was also a Russian spy. The Russians were allied with the Serbs. He gave them the war plans. The Serbians had the war plans. And so as it bogged down, the entire world was dragged to war. 16 million dead, 20 million wounded. This is an insider threat that changed history. A little closer to Boston here. This is American Semiconductor Corp. They make wind control systems for wind turbines. They're based about 35 miles from here in Devens, Massachusetts. Fort Devens, there we go. Fort Devens, Massachusetts. I knew I'd get some local knowledge. So Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And so they made, back in 2010, 2/3 of their revenue came from a single customer. It was China's Sinovel Wind Group. $315 million in revenue, 2/3 from Sinovel. Suddenly, in March of 2011, Sinovel stopped taking orders. They stopped receiving. They also stopped making orders. American Semiconductor announced that to the market on April 5th. The stock dropped 40% in one day, 90% in the course of 6 months. It stayed down, and it actually continued to decrease. So what happened? Turns out it was another insider threat. So this man, and I will not pronounce this name right, Dejan Karabasevich, close, something like that. Dejan K, we'll call him. He was the chief engineer for the for American Semiconductor's office in Austria. And he pleaded guilty in 2011 to theft of trade secrets. He was induced by Sinovel with a $1.7 million contract, an apartment in Beijing, access to women, payments to one of his girlfriends, to download the code and put it on a thumb drive and give it to Sinovel. So we know that this is true because the FBI found the proprietary source code running on a Sinovel wind turbine in Massachusetts that was purchased by the Massachusetts Wind Authority, River Power, something, it's some resource, wind resource, and it was purchased with $4.7 million in federal stimulus funds. It was also found in another wind turbine in the Middle East by AMSC engineers. So this quote is one of the, this was in a Skype message or an email that was sent between Daejeon and the Sinovel execs. Kind of sums it up. So another insider threat. This time it didn't change the course of history, but it did ruin a company. The only mistake that Sinovel made was they paid him too much money. I could have done the same thing for $500. In fact, we didn't actually steal anything, but we went and we contracted malware to be created that did exactly what he did for $500. It will evade every antivirus engine that's on the market. $5 billion of investment that goes into these AV products evades them all. It will find source code on your laptop. It will look across the network. It will find the source code, and it sends it over an encrypted channel back to a server. And the reason that we could do this, trust me, I do not know how to create any of that stuff. Some people in this room might. I don't know how to do that. I am actually not that technical. But there's a great economy that lets people specialize. This is from a RAND study that was just published, and it talks about the malware economy. I think for a long time we've known that there was a malware economy, but the size and the specialization continues to increase. So there are people who are general members. I think that's where I would go, buyers and observers. You just go out and you ask for the things that you want. There's vendors who provide all sorts of services. There are people who are experts who develop specific code and do zero-day exploits and all of that. It is a very, very well-orchestrated economy with, no one knows the exact size, but billions of dollars in this economy. So in this context, when you can get inside and steal the source code, the intellectual property of an organization for $500 and destroy it, how do you defend that? It seems almost hopeless, but there's always hope. So we'll go here. How many of you have thought in the last 3 months of spam as an urgent and pressing problem? Wow. So one. What about anyone else? Last 12 months? Okay. So this is a problem I would argue is largely solved. Not perfect, but largely solved. And no?
Not even close.
Okay.
I've long held a point of view that the three biggest threats to any technology system are the user, and the user. And spam does one thing, targets the user.
So I'd actually make one distinction. I think that's a fair point that there are phishing style, very targeted phishing attacks. When I say spam, I'm talking about spam, which is meaning with the connotation of kind of broad-based, high-volume marketing message, all of that, versus a targeted email attack.
So if you're talking volume, it's one thing, but in the context that you just went from malware to here, I'm thinking of all the malware in the spam.
Got it. So there are targeted attacks which are highly effective at getting people to click on that $500 malware link. I'm talking specifically about the volume-based spam problem that looked like this in 2007 and 2008. And you saw this going up to 90% plus of the messages that went on the internet were spam. And it looked, I mean, look at that curve. It looks impossible. How are you going to stop that? You stopped it by changing the economics. And so if you think about economics, you have to look at both the return, how much does the criminal make, and how much do they have to invest. And you have to drive down the return while you increase the investment. In spam, it was a pretty simple game, right? You send out a whole bunch of messages, they're marketing messages. You get people to click on them and buy your product, often Viagra, Levitra, whatever it might be. And that was where you generated the return. So you want your return to go up, you have to get more messages through, and you have to reduce the cost of the investment in infrastructure to send those. It's that simple. So how do we stop it? First, we started taking down the infrastructure that sent the messages. And this is from, we copied it from Krebs on Security. I think the original source was Message Labs. So this is actually the chunk of the curve that I showed before, where it looked like it was going crazy. And then you see these spikes, and it goes up and down. Each one of those was a takedown. So first, there was a concerted law enforcement effort to take down McColo. That was a place that hosted all sorts of command and control servers. Bam, it dropped off of a cliff. 70% of the volume of spam dropped almost overnight. So then they built up another infrastructure, took another one down. 3FN was another hosting provider that provided all of these botnets, or that hosted a lot of command and control servers. So this period continued to go on and on and on. Each time, the criminals had to rebuild their infrastructure. They had to reinvest to create it. And then just notice the tail of the curve starting in about 2011. I'll come back to that because it stayed down, and the question is why. So we took down the servers. We raised the cost of investing in infrastructure. The next thing that happened was a bunch of companies, and these are probably the three leaders in coming with a technology approach that drove the catch rates up to 99% plus. And so now, in order to get messages through, you had to send a lot more. And that was reputation systems. It was different techniques of identifying and stopping spam. Full disclosure, I worked for Ironport, so I still kind of have a soft spot in my heart for that. Yeah.
So how did you increase the cost, though? I mean, you decreased the success
Yes.
in the prior chart. Is that then
So-
how you increase the cost?
So every time that you take down an infrastructure, McColo, they have to rebuild, they have to buy servers, they have to put them back, so that drives the investment up.
Agreed.
Yep.
Okay,
So this is decreasing the return, or for fixed cost, it's decreasing their return. If they want the same return, they have to invest more, they have to send more messages. Okay. So that raised the bar in terms of getting messages through. Then we prosecuted the spammers. We took them to court. We created laws. And this guy in Moscow, Ivan Gusevich, his company did about 120 million in revenue in 2007. He personally made about $2 million. So they prosecuted him. They took him to court for violating some of the spamming laws. We took, here in the US, Sanford Wallace was indicted. This guy was the spam king. I will come back to Sanford. But we started to raise the consequences, personal consequences to the people who were participating in this.
that's another way we increase the cost.
Yes, personal cost. People who have to spend time in prison or get fines, that tends to increase the cost.
So Thornton, jail time, deterrent.
So we prosecuted them, but maybe one of the least known, and this will come back to that chart of why it stayed down, one of the most effective things was that Visa got involved, because all of these transactions were consumer to business. They relied on a credit card. And so Visa and MasterCard were sitting in the middle of all of these transactions. And for a long time, they were making money, right? There's hundreds of millions of dollars flowing through this ecosystem. They're taking money. They didn't want to stop it. But then they decided with this global brand protection initiative that it was hurting their brand. So they did two things. One, they increased the diligence that was required for certain types of high-risk categories. That included pharmaceutical sales. It also included things like gambling. And you had to have lots of capital. They went through an intensive screening process in order to get a merchant account. The second thing that they did, this was phase 2 of their attack, or of the global brand protection program, was that they started raining down fines for illegal use of trademarks like Viagra, Cialis, and other things about the business practice. tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. So how did this work? I love this quote. This is from a guy who ran the affiliate program, one of the biggest affiliate programs. Visa is burning us with napalm. So this was a guy, he posted this initially in a forum called gofuckbiz.ru. But this was the affiliate marketing program. And the way that this industry worked, there were affiliates that basically farmed out. You did a bunch of different things, and they tracked that you drove business to them. They paid you a chunk of it as the spammer to kind of close when they closed the transaction. So this was one of the guys who ran one of the largest ones. It shut them down. It drove them out of business. And that is why the level of spam has stayed down. So across the board, this is about changing the economics of spamming. So it's a little bit like whack-a-mole. You put this down, the criminal economy has moved on to another thing with this whole malware and kind of the economy of malware. So how do we use these same approaches and concepts to address the new challenge that we face? And so the first thing is, as you think about this as an economics problem rather than a build a higher wall problem, one of the challenges with security is the discussion is, how do I build the highest possible wall? I'm building the perfect defense. You'll never do it. You cannot stop the most advanced and persistent attackers. You just can't do it. So if you start to think about it as an economics game and you look at the attackers, they have some level of funding, they have some level of skills. And if I can drive to the upper right so that only the attackers who have the most skills and the most funding can come after me, that's a win. Because there are tens of thousands of script kiddies who used automated tools to attack. There are maybe thousands of organized crime hackers. There are, hundreds of really high caliber nation state actors, maybe into the low thousands. But you have a very different problem if you can create this, what I'm referring to as an economic exclusion zone, by basically forcing all of the low skill, low funding actors out of the space. And even with some of the nation states, unless you are the only one with assets that they're interested in, they still may go somewhere else to get a better ROI or to get the assets that they want. So think about it as an economics game, and you have to look at this just like with the spam problem. This is not something that you can solve with technology. You can help with technology, but you really have to think about this holistically. How do you, from a technology standpoint, change? So one of the most fundamental things is, rather than trying to stop the threat and build the perfect defense, flip it around and say, okay, so I'm going to be breached. My device is going to be owned. How do I design my network and my systems different so that I reduce the risk? Back to that ROI. Okay, so they're going to get in. How do I reduce the reward that they get so that it's less worth the investment? So that's one part. The second, we saw the power of Visa's brand protection program to go after the money. We have to do the same thing here. Go after the money, figure out how to, and in this case, it's not as easy as Visa, because there's no business to consumer that's happening here. So come back to that. Bitcoin is a key piece of this economy. The third big pillar is law enforcement. So we do need to hold the actors accountable. And this is really difficult because this is happening across borders. Often the victims are here. With the organized criminals, they're coming out of typically Eastern Europe. So it's difficult to get the enforcement to happen, but that's going to be a critical piece in accountability. So let's start with, how do you design assuming that you have a breach? How many of you have seen that type of a message from your financial services provider that says, I've never seen your computer, I want to send you an SMS text to give you a code? Anyone? So that's exactly what they're doing. They're assuming that your login credential has been stolen. So when the attacker goes and they try and log in, not from your computer, they're going to force an out-of-band authentication. A lot of the big banks and private wealth management will also require that for large transactions. So now, just having your login credential cannot do damage. You need it. Without it, you can't do anything, but it's not enough in and of itself. You also have to have that cell phone, control of that cell phone, and be able to enter your code. So this is designing, assuming that you're breached. The other thing that you need as a part of that is you need to be able to identify, so I'm looking for a unique system. How do I identify a unique system? Because if you're just using IP address, IP can be spoofed. The attackers can know what your IP is. So how do I uniquely identify your system? There's actually very good technology because the web browser gives you all sorts of information back to the web app that allows it to be customized for your locale, your fonts, your plugins. If you look at all of that, it effectively creates a fingerprint for the system. So you can very accurately identify whether it's the same system or not. A little bit of fuzzy matching technology, and you're done. So this is another way that technology can help. Another area where technology design can help, or how you think about the problem can help. In most devices, or in device security, what you tend to see is that you have a VPN connected back to the data center from the mobile device that is at the device level. So basically, all of the traffic can access back to the data center. And the problem with that is malware can get in the middle. So one, that malware, if it's on your device, it can get access back to your data center and get all kinds of interesting assets that are sitting in there. The second thing is that it can get access to the application data that's on your device. So by thinking about device security as a per device level, you've exposed a lot of that data and assets to malware stealing it. If instead you make a very simple change and say, you know what, my security should be on an application level. I'm going to assume that my device is breached. You can fundamentally change the equation. So now think about connecting the VPN from the app on your device to the app in the data center. Protected end to end. Now the malware can't get access to that pipe to go up into my data center to do anything. You can also then encrypt the data around the application. So it's application specific, the malware can't get access to it. Just by changing the mindset to say my device is owned and designing with that in mind, you can change the equation.
So Kevin, are you saying essentially containerized virtual container within the device? So there's its own Chinese wall within the device that's protected?
Yeah. So yes. So that's the core of it. So there's two pieces here that are distinct and different. One is the VPN going application specific versus device generic.
That's in old Navy parlance, that would be scrambled radio communications
Yep.
between ship to ship.
Yep, exactly. So that exactly. So yes, but yeah, the specific channel with just that application. The second thing is to use a container. The problem with container, yes. Although the challenges with container technology, there have been containers like good technology, which I've met very few people who believe it's that good. But it creates, for any of you who've seen this, other than the venture capitals, they made a lot of money off of it. But the challenge is that it creates an experience that's different than your device. So with good, you have two inboxes, you have two calendars. It doesn't work very well. The second approach that people moved on to was, okay, I'm going to create a container that is basically an app wrapper. So for every application, I'm going to break it, I'm going to put a wrapper in it, and now I have a protected containerized application. Problem there is, one, you break the application more times than not in trying to wrapper it. Two, based on Apple just updated their terms of service. So any app wrappering invalidates the license, you're breaking Apple's terms of service. That's not a good thing if you're trying to get to iOS. So the third approach, and this is the approach we believe will win out from a technology standpoint, is basically to insert a shim between the application and the operating system, so every file write is intercepted, encrypted, and then you don't break the application, you don't have to change the application, you don't violate Apple's terms of service.
But you do that at the file write level to the device?
Yes, that's our belief.
Thank you.
Not to say there's not other ways to do it, that's the way we see it. So the third major technology area that we see an opportunity for is in how you segment your data center assets. So the classic model is either by zone of what goes in it, or by functional database versus app servers. You create these big zones in your data center, and you enforce those in a firewall, and you say, any traffic between those zones I'm going to care about, but not within a zone I'm going to trust it. And really, you had to do that because it's just so hard to manage if you go past that. But the weakness or the exposure that provides is, if I have an application, a web app that's in my DMZ, it gets compromised, now that malware can propagate, it can find holes between the zones, because there are some somewhere, and eventually it gets into something like my PCI credit card data, and it exfiltrates it. So you create, in having these macro zones, you make the problem of actually defending all of your assets much, much harder. So the question is, how can we get to a model where you're really looking at micro-segmentation, per application segmentation conceptually, where every single application is walled off. You don't trust any other app. So if I breach that web app, I get what's in the web app, nothing more. I stop it from propagating anywhere else in my data center. And this is an interesting space where if you look back a couple years, everyone was terrified about what cloud apps did to challenge security. Because in a cloud environment where you're looking to share your resources and have elastic resources, you lose the ability to have basic physical network zone segmentation. But what you gain is the opportunity to turn the paradigm on its head. So today, we think about it as define a set of network segments, drop my apps into those segments. When you have cloud, you can turn that around, because the cloud knows a lot about where your applications are deployed. You have to, from a package management standpoint. So flip it around. As you orchestrate your applications, build in the security, and then affect the security policy, and effectively plumb your firewalls, your network segmentation in as you deploy the app. So you still have firewalls, you still have segmentation, but now you're driving it from the application rather than setting up a pre-existing network segmentation. You can get to that micro-segmentation model. You can stop the propagation of threats within the data center. Which brings us to finance. So the Visa and the MasterCard is a choke point in the spam scenario. In the malware economy, the primary way to fund and change, to buy services, exchange services, is Bitcoin. And this was $16 billion in aggregate value last year, and stored in Bitcoin. It's about $6 billion now, extremely volatile market, but to say the least. But this is an area where it's valid to have new types of currencies. I think there's a lot of great innovation that happens within that. But if we're going to stop the malware economy, it's also important that we have the types of financial regulation and controls that are put in place for real currencies, especially around things like anti-money laundering. Because it can be in Bitcoin, you can have all of the service exchange you want within the malware economy. For those guys to make money and actually buy real things, at least in the world today, you have to get it out into hard currency of some sort. And so you still have a control point, a choke point. And there are movements to make Bitcoin completely anonymous and untraceable, like ZeroCoin. What you've seen from the Bitcoin industry is they're actually moving away and distancing themselves from initiatives like ZeroCoin. Because as soon as you get rid of all accountability and traceability, effectively the only legitimate, or the only people who will go there are the criminals. There's no legitimate use or minimal legitimate use for it. And we started to see this. So Bitcoin has begun to be regulated, and this was FinCEN, which for the US regulates a lot of the currency. They do all the anti-money laundering. At the end of last year, there were only 35 businesses associated with Bitcoin who have registered with FinCEN and said, we are a money service. We transfer money, we do other things with money. And so FinCEN looked around, they said, there's a lot more companies doing this. They mailed out about a dozen letters. The company referred to here is run by a guy called Mike Caldwell out of Utah. He basically is a mint for Bitcoin. He established himself as a mint in his own home. He creates physical coins. He embeds the private key associated with the Bitcoin in it. He ships it to you. And they sent him a warning letter. They said, you look like a money transmitter to me. Why aren't you regulated? And so he shut down. And you can say, gosh, here's a guy who had an innovative idea, but he was acting as a mint with no regulation, effectively. And on the flip side, that was the big government coming down and attempting to regulate. The other thing that we're beginning to see is market forces driving this in the right direction. So CoinFloor is a UK-based company that came out and said, we think we can create a competitive advantage for ourselves by establishing transparency and compliance as one of our core principles. So they announced this. They're marketing that they are transparent and compliant, and they will comply with all regulations. They're registered with what's the IRS equivalent, or the HMR, Her Majesty's something in the UK that regulates all this. So they've registered with that, and they're openly trying to be compliant to drive legitimate users of Bitcoin to their exchange. So, and when you see what's happened to some other exchanges, that sort of positive marketing can be very good.
Kevin, do you have a point of view on the anonymity provided by Bitcoin and the changes there versus the anonymity of the, well, I'll call it more legacy?
So,
currencies in terms of tracking money movement, therefore, criminals
So-
and evils.
yeah, so Bitcoin is traceable. It's just, that's why things like ZeroCoin came out as initiatives to say we want to remove the traceability. What it's not is well regulated. So there's still, how you actually apply, like, in fact, there's still a disagreement within the international community. I believe it's Scandinavian countries, Norway and two Scandinavian countries came out and said, we are not going to treat this as money. We're not going to regulate it as money. At the same time, you've seen China really crack down. In fact, one of the reasons that Bitcoin declined so much in value was China said, you cannot use this as currency to buy goods and services in the Chinese market. So that pushed it down. So the governments have not yet decided how to even treat it.
But,
So-
so from my point of view, the jury is still out as to whether Bitcoin is just an analog to baseball cards. And people
Yeah.
buy and sell baseball cards all the time. Nobody gets their hackles up. Yet here we have Bitcoin.
The difference, but the
I'll give you a real life example. I was at Anchorage off Alexandria, Egypt, on a merchant ship in 1978. The only way we could get a tug to come out was to throw them the international unit of currency, which was a pack of Marlboro cigarettes, or a case of Marlboro cigarettes. And unless you had American tobacco, they weren't going to come out and service you. And so that was the de facto currency at the scene.
Yeah.
So here we have a new de facto currency emerging, and I don't see a lot of difference between the two.
So I would say the one major difference, and this is why it drives the malware economy, is I don't have to be standing next to you to give you a Bitcoin, right? And so from the enablement of the malware economy, this is how we went to get the $500 in malware. It was paid for with
There
Bitcoin,
lies my question about
right?
anonymity.
And it's not anonymous. It can be tracked.
Right.
It's just not well regulated, and it's not well tracked. So we haven't gotten the controls in place. And I'm not pro or against Bitcoin. It's a currency. It's a way. But I believe that every currency like this, if we want to stop malware, if we want to stop criminal economies altogether, forget just malware, you have to have regulation and financial, like the money laundering controls on this.
There's only one reason for money laundering to exist.
Yep, exactly. And that's where I think that is why there has been such a distancing, even in the Bitcoin community, from things like ZeroCoin, right? Because as soon as you get rid of the traceability completely, why? The The only reason is for criminal activity. Okay, so now we're back to the law side. So we've hit technology, we've hit finance, law. So this is Sanford Wallace. I mentioned him as one of the guys that was prosecuted. This guy, self-proclaimed king of spam, I think in 1997, he started out sending junk faxes. So he's got a long history in the spam and being annoying industry. So he moved from that into spam. He was the guy who first brought and popularized the scareware spyware. If you remember the trend of, hey, you've been infected. If your CD-ROM drive just opened, pay me money and it'll go away. That was him, one of his innovations. He also, so he got a Federal Trade Commission, FTC, filed suit against him in 2004. They filed suit against him in 2006 and won $5 million worth of fines. His money was all hidden offshore. He declared bankruptcy. He continued to innovate, and he got into MySpace in 2007. 11,000 fake profiles that he created to send spam throughout the MySpace community, and he was fined $230 million for that. To my knowledge, he has not yet paid any of that. He moved from MySpace to Facebook. And what?
Was he this Upworthy thing?
No, I didn't. So he moved on to Facebook in 2009, and he got it was a $710 million fine against him for his spamming of the walls within Facebook. So he's very up to all of the trends. He's an innovator. He was the last I saw of him. What? It was the FTC. So they were all civil. All of these were civil fines. Facebook, MySpace.
The government's accounts receivable, right? Is that what he's fined?
So MySpace, MySpace and MySpace and Facebook filed suit against him in civil. They were civil charges. In 2011, he was indicted on criminal charges, which he's fighting, and he's out on bail. The last that I saw of his residence, he was actually working in Las Vegas, and he is a DJ. He was called DJ Master Web. I'm not even making this up. You could go search that. It sounds like, but so for all of that, the prosecuting spammers, it has been very, very ineffective because the laws have not been well constructed and well enforced. So as we look at malware, which you can make the argument that spam was just marketing and it was a pain in the butt that wasted a lot of resources, but it's very difficult to argue that breaking into organizations and stealing their core IP is not criminal. So if we're going to get serious in stopping some of these malware types of threats, we do need to make it clear, because if you go back to that malware economy, who's doing something illegal? Is it illegal to write that malware that I bought that will go in and evade every antivirus engine and steal data and send it back to an encrypted server? Well, but I don't think even if you're an average citizen, what's illegal about that? I didn't do anything with it. So we really need to think through, and I would argue that probably you have to target the top down in those organizations. You have to hit the people who are making the money, actually taking the criminal action, and focus on them versus the guys who are writing the malware.
But Kevin, as I work through the issue, our legal system heretofore over the last centuries and millennia have been based on the concept of physical presence.
Yep.
What's the concept of physical presence in cyberspace?
Yeah.
Either it's everywhere or it's nowhere.
Yeah. Well, and you really get into it because in these types of a scenario, you have, in many cases, it's the organized crime is coming out of Eastern Europe, attacking assets in from going after the assets, right? So now when you think of a law enforcement action, right, you have to have a victim here. You have to go after with, and of course the everything going on with geopolitics says that it's unlikely that they're going to want to cooperate. So this is a really hard thing to solve, right? So.
Well, it's the dark side of the promise of the internet.
Yep.
And the only law being enforced in Eastern Europe right now is the law of gravity, right? So
If that. Yeah. So this is tough. It's a tough ask, but at some point if we're going to get serious, we have to go, and I think it's a top-down press from to go after the people who are actually making money out of this. So that's the pillars of how to think differently. And now we'll return to Mr. Alfred Redl, the spy catcher who was caught in his own trap. So he, as the head of counterintelligence, had set up a sharing relationship with Germany to share anything that might be suspicious. So the Germans found an envelope that was addressed to Nikos Nikedas, some random name, care of General Delivery Vienna. And they opened it and they found 6,000 kronen, which is the equivalent of about $25,000 today. And so they decided to reseal the envelope, send it on, alerted their Austrian counterparts, who set up a stakeout, had a couple of detectives watching the mailbox to see who was going to come and pick up this suspicious envelope. They were, waiting and waiting and waiting. They waited for 6 weeks. 2 more envelopes showed up in that time, stuffed with banknotes. And finally, when the little bell that they had set up when the box opened rang, they were caught loafing, napping, didn't see the guy who came. So they went running out into the street. They saw him get in a cab and jotted down the license plate of the cab and went and quizzed the clerk at the hotel or at the post office. Didn't remember anything, just a guy with a gray hat. And so they got out of luck. But then a few minutes later, 10 minutes later, the cab came back and parked in front. And so they found that this drop-off had happened at the Hotel Klomser. And so they went to the Hotel Klomser, and that was their first stroke of good luck is finding this. The second stroke of good luck was that a penknife sheath was left in the cab. And probably the guy opening his envelopes full of money, and he had dropped the sheath. So they went into the clerk at the hotel and they said, "Can you announce that this has been found?" So clerk announced it. 2 hours later, Colonel Alfred Redl came down, full uniform, to pick up his pen sheath. They were completely shocked. He realized he had been found out. At midnight that night, they knocked on, it was in room number 1. They knocked on room number 1. They handed him a gun, left. And he took care of, there was no trial. So what can we learn from this type of technique? What they did was that they basically used deception and counterintelligence to trap him. So the question is, can we do similar things to criminals in trying to find them early in their attacks? So we believe that deception can be a very powerful tool in much the same way that they sent the mail on, that they gave the clerk the pen sheath. If you look at web apps, it's just one example of deception. If you look at a web app and you start to break it down and look at the code, there's very few places where this web app interacts with the database. What you can start to do is put traps in there, deceptive things that criminals will trigger across as they try and find vulnerabilities to compromise the app. So this is one example. This form field, you can add an extra hidden parameter that says SQL index. Hidden parameter doesn't impact the application at all, but now, as I'm the criminal trying to find the way in, my tools are going to trip across that tar trap. It tells me, as the defender, that is someone who's trying to break into my app. And you can then, rather than, in most security, what you do is you see a signature that fires and you say, stop. But that's not the right way to respond, because then you're just telling them that you found them and how you found them. So instead, apply that that same deception technique to basically waste their time, change the economics. So slow down their connection, log them out, throw up a CAPTCHA that breaks their automation. Lots of different things that you can do if you think about this as an economics game, and how do you deceive them. The last area where we can begin to use these types of deception techniques is to go after the most advanced threats. And so here I have a simple to advanced and opportunistic to targeted. And what we've seen over time is that we've gone up to this level of very, very evasive advanced threat. That it's the type that's impossible to find for most technologies. So you see antivirus is kind of played back in the basic area of the curve. It doesn't get new threats very well. That's why I was able to get that $500 malware that went right around it. You've seen APT solutions. come out that are specifically saying we're not signature-based, we're going to try and catch this, and they catch a lot more. But now the solutions also know that those exist, and they figured out how to detect them. And for example, with a sandbox that runs malware and tries to look for it and detect things about it, the malware is also detecting that it's in the sandbox. It's doing a little bit of evasion and deception back. Figures out that it's in the sandbox, it runs a stall loop, just outwaits, or it never runs because it figures out that it's there. So the question is, how do you address that last gap up to evasive threats? If I had the answer, I'd probably be off at a startup somewhere, but we have some really, really good ideas of how to at least approach this problem. And so I think the idea of using deception to effectively insert into the middle of the kill chain for malware. So the kill chain, basically if you look at any piece of malware to do its job, it's not just about infecting. It infects the system. We've seen it's very difficult to stop that in all cases. But before it does damage, it has to do a lot more. It has to go back to its command and control servers. It has to download updates. It has to find systems. It has to find the code somewhere else. It has to exfiltrate it. So all along that kill chain, there are opportunities to find it, and deception can be a great way. So spin up fake file shares. Spin up fake processes on endpoints that show that they're running AV. One of the first things that the malware does is it goes and it looks for AV processes on the endpoint and it turns them off so that they can't detect it. So you can do lots of little tips and tricks like that. There are techniques that I've heard where all of these endpoints will talk back to their command and control server at some point, but many of them are smart enough not to do it on a corporate network. They wait till you're at home where there's no security. So I've seen technology that will go and actually ping and try to wake up the command and control within your network so that you can find it while it's there, see it, and mitigate it. So again, using a deception technique. So there's lots of opportunities, but a big piece of this is think differently. Instead of trying to stop the initial infection with malware, yes, it's still good to do. If you can, you should, but you have to also design, assuming that you're going to be infected, how do you insert into the rest of the kill chain? So changing the economics, I think this is an awesome opportunity from an innovation standpoint to think very differently about the problem of security, not as a build a higher wall, but as an economics problem, and focus on changing the economics, changing that equation of return on investment. Thanks.
It's not about money.
Yeah, I mean that's a much. The economics argument doesn't. It won't solve the nation-state actor problem. It will. I would say that there are still people who would go after the U.S. government or any national government who are not well-funded and don't have high skills. So it's still good to keep them out. And I would also say that a lot of the things that we do from a defense standpoint, from thinking about it as an economics problem, slow down the attacks, mitigate the risk. I mean, a lot of the same principles will help, but they're not going to solve the best funded, most persistent attackers who aren't financially driven. Yep.
Is there another vector? I've spent a lot of time thinking about the consumer side of the problem, and oftentimes it seems that it would be easier to detect the thing that wasn't supposed to happen as the result of a malware attack. So the vector that you put up there, I think, is a great one to pursue at each link in the chain. But is there another vector that says, hey, there's just a unlikely thing about to happen going outbound from the system.
Yeah.
And is
So-
there work on that vector?
So there definitely is, and so historically the technology was NBAD, behavioral anomaly detection. It got a very bad name because it has extremely high false positives. So it can find things that are anomalous, but it also finds 50,000 other things that are perfectly normal. And this is one of the real challenges is, in fact, if you go to the Target attack that happened and stole all of the credit cards around the holidays last year, some of the reports came out and they said, well, they had FireEye. FireEye had detected these malwares and set them at a severe level. Why didn't anyone do anything? And I don't know, I have no inside information. That may be the right question to ask, but it may have also been the case that there were 200, 300, 400, 1,000 other things that were also tagged as very high threat level. And if you're how do you even track them down and figure out, because they are advanced threats that are not made to be detected, it takes an incredible amount of skill to find out if it's real or not. So it's easy in hindsight to say it was there. It's a lot harder. And I think this goes back to the perfect defense. A lot of, from the vendor side, it's a lot easier to have a product that always detects all of the positives, even if it pulls along a whole bunch of other stuff, than to have the thing that very, very accurately detects things but may miss a few, right? The reality is it's a lot more usable to find the stuff accurately and know everything it detects is positive, but that's not the way vendors are incented. And the testing methodologies and the way that customers evaluate products, I think that contributes to the problem.
And where's big data in all of this? I mean, you just described the perfect use case for big data.
Yeah.
That would be exactly how I would go about solving this, and that's exactly what has reduced all the numbers of false positives in other categories, where you can figure out exactly who of the 10,000 people crossing the street at a particular time is going to buy your product.
Yeah, no, so I think that's a great, the thing that's changed, and I kind of got off course, but the thing that has changed since the NBAD technology is that we have more compute, we have more facilities to kind of crunch on it. It's still a very, very difficult problem. I think people are getting better, but it has not yet been solved. Finding the thing that's a little bit anomalous, because the other thing to understand is that the malware writers also know that people are looking for them, especially the advanced threats. So they're tunneling over, they're acting like they're Gmail, they're spoofing that they're a different application to get detected as that, tagged as that. So it's really difficult to find these, but there are a lot of people who are looking at it, working on it. Big data gives us another shot, but I still think the incentives piece, I mean, it's one of the challenges, because we go out as a security vendor, you get tested by, and I don't want to throw any specific lab, but NSS Labs is one of the most common to kind of give coverage. And they force you to write a whole bunch of signatures that are aimed at making sure you catch every single thing. Doesn't matter. You optimize to get the maximum coverage on that, whether it works in the real world or not. That's a problem in my view.
Yeah, thank you. It's a brilliant piece of work, so I'd like to compliment you on your opening story. It's just wonderful. But as I step back and look at the whole thing from an anthropological standpoint, it's like you frame the conversation as a battle of elites, if you will. Bad guys, smart guys, versus good guys, smart guys, battling it out. Are there messages, behavioral messages, for those of us who live in mud huts, who are not at that elite status? You see what I'm saying? I mean, is it really a Gene Spafford, University of Pennsylvania type of, or Penn State, smart guy versus smart guy type of thing? Or like, what do mere mortals, i.e. boards of directors and like line of business executives, do confronted with this situation?
That sounds like a fantastic question for a working dinner, but but I think so. I think there's some things like who's going to design a microsegmentation strategy that's based on the fact that you're in a cloud and can provision. Like, yes, that's going to be someone very technical has to do that with. Hopefully the board can at least understand what the strategy is and why it's important to make that investment. I would say some of these things are things that we all have to take action on as citizens, not just as IT people. So if you look at, do you want regulation of Bitcoin? Well, I'm sure there's going to be a lobby against it saying big bad government doing nasty stuff. But when you start to realize some of the issues and what it enables, maybe it changes your perspective on that. Or looking at, do you put laws in place and work to prosecute these people? Do you support that or not? Do you work for that or not? It took, in the spam case, it took a holistic approach. This is a harder problem. It's going to take concerted effort across a whole bunch of things, some specialized, some not.
The whole Bitcoin is not as simple, especially when you look at world politics, because one person's crime in the U.S. may be a freedom fighter in another country.
Yeah.
And China doesn't want to have it, but a lot of the Tibetan and other people want to have access to that anonymous coin because it allows them to do other things.
Yeah, none of these issues are simple or cut and dried. Yeah.
It's good to have it better regulated.
Yes.
Nobody can stop it. It's happening.
No, I completely agree. I think
China will come along. They want to control things they cannot control and are going to play.
I don't think I'll put my money in a Bitcoin fund. It's a little too volatile for me. But but I mean, those types of things, digital currencies, yeah. And it's not just Bitcoin. There's other digital currencies, but Bitcoin is definitely the poster child and where most of the critical mass is.
Some of the technologies discussed here, including perhaps big data analysis in real time, potentially pose overhead in the network operation. What marginal value is there in forensic analysis? Like, you discovered you were a victim of an attack. It turned out to be a successful attack. Is it worth investing whatever infrastructure is required to figure out how they got it?
I have a perspective on that. I don't know if this is another one that's not cut and dried. I think the most effective use of forensic technology is when you detect a threat early before it's done damage and you want to figure out what they're going after. Forensics after the fact, to me, is a very expensive way to look in the rearview mirror. I mean, your house is burned down. Figure out the smoke alarm. You wanted the smoke alarm. You don't have it. Looking at it after the fact and kind of parsing it, I don't know. I think with the forensics, one of the biggest challenges is skill set. So to do that work, that's not just a technology problem. You can get the best forensic capture systems in the world and capture all the, have all your PCAPs and all your files. Finding how to actually sift through that is an incredibly specialized skill set. There aren't many people who can do it. It's extremely expensive. Governments and financial services are about the only place that you can get the right skill set. So what do you do if you're the rest of the world?
So what role do you see for education, right? So how do you get people with, I was talking about everybody else, right? That's not the more of the elites, but how do you get people to care enough, to participate enough, to educate them enough? Because some of this is pretty complex, and there's always that balance between, oh, this is really convenient and user-friendly to do that, or has a great interface, versus here's what's really going on in the background, and overlay that with sort of the different generations and different views of what is privacy and what is my personal data. So do you have any thoughts about the best way to try to engage communities in energizing that conversation in ways that aren't like, okay, I just want convenience, or I'm going to put not have anything electronic, right?
Yeah. So I will say one of my strengths is probably not figuring out the message that would rally people to a cause. I tend to spend a lot more time in the technology space. So I think we're in order to get that sort of critical mass, the message has to change. We have to tie it to why it's important to individuals versus this is still an abstract problem. It's attacking corporations, but so what? Right. So I think there's probably a personalization of why it matters at a almost societal level that you have to make first and then tie it to individuals. But the other role, by the way, that I do see from education is, I talked about a skill set gap. So there's a skill set gap in some of the advanced security. That's one that is not going to be fixed overnight. And I think there are very, very lucrative opportunities that will continue to exist, but we need to get people who are trained. Schools help a lot with that.
Which slide?
Well, interestingly, yes, it could probably be lucrative either side, but we want the ones who are on the good side of it.
There's a great message that's actually obvious in your talk, right? Just don't look at it just as a technical problem.
Hmm.
Right? A lot of students have been involved with just not a scrap of, hey, this is a technical problem, we're gonna solve it with a technical mechanism. No, don't look at it. Look at it as an economics problem. Do this kind of stuff for social and monetary benefit. Right? Consider that as one of the options.
That's a good point. Okay. Thank you.